Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mildra, and I will be your gaming monk for the evening. It may come as a little surprise that I am not fond of the spellcasting model utilized in various editions of Dungeons & Dragons, as well as other games like Suikoden and some very early Final Fantasy entries, along with plenty of games that were drawing upon D&D, such as Wizardry. Dubbed the Vancian system after the creator of the Dying Earth series of fantasy stories, Jack Vance, is the primary spellcasting system for D&D and plenty of its derivatives. I've talked about it plenty of times in my dislike for it, but in this video, I want to have a summation that I can point to the same way I did for the JRPG question. Anyway, the system relies on three principles. 1. The spell must be prepared/memorized in advance. 2. The spell does exactly what it says as it says it, i.e. the fire and forget rule. And 3. The spell is forgotten, quote-unquote, after casting and must be re-memorized in order to cast again. In the context of the Dying Earth books, which are more akin to post-apocalypse sword and sorcery in genre, this works fine, I guess, but this is because magic is treated as this advanced form of mathematics that operated under Clark's Law, something that the Color of Magic kind of lampooned in Discworld. And again, everything gets lampooned in Discworld. However, it's frequently used in high fantasy and gestalt fantasy settings where magic is far more understood and even utilized as a semi-everyday part of life, which is part of the problem. It may seem like I'm picking on D&D for this trend, but that's only because D&D is the hobby's patient zero as far as a lot of people are concerned. As such, ideas and concepts it presents will get carried over into other media. In that regard, my picking on it, I believe, is justified for the purposes of this. The concept of charges in the Vancian system is somewhat of a holdover from D&D's predecessor, Chainmail. In that game, wizards acted as an artillery-like unit compared to others. This was later ported into D&D, but across the large dungeons with individual players, as opposed to just skirmishes. The idea doesn't hold... In a more individual base, the idea doesn't hold as much water. And the other big problem I have with it is the recharging preparing cycle. It emphasizes more of a cast and recover and less of the adventuring proper. Having such a limitation on casting and recharging in a high fantasy setting just doesn't add up to me. Though I will admit that I'm a little more lenient when I have an actual setting that justifies it. The setting problem is a whole other video, and I will get to that one of these days as well. However, the biggest problem is how the artillery status of magic users is justified. This is typically done through the explosion of power that mages get at higher levels compared to non-magic classes, and in some games even lower levels. In such cases, they are able to utilize spells that can end whole encounters or step into territories that are reserved for other classes, or in some cases even taking away from the GM's narrative control. Moreover, many spells have an issue of automatically scaling, and oftentimes scaling faster than other archetypes, but their costs remaining the same, whether that be cost in spell slots or action economy. This is something more recent editions have tried to address but was far too selective about. For example, no matter how much damage a fireball spell deals, it still uses the same level spell slot. As a result of both the power explosion and the breaching into other class territories, the Vancian model bloats the spellcasting segment of a given RPG book, cutting into the spaces for non-magic options. D&D 3rd Edition and Pathfinder 1st Edition are two of the biggest examples of this, but it's an issue when the game isn't specifically about magic users, compared to, say, Ars Magica, where being magic used is kind of the point. But even though I'm not going to be doing a full thing on the setting problem here, I do want to touch on the fact that there is no in-universe justification for magic working this way. Yes, there's the fact that Gygax and Arneson were fans of Jack Vance and all of that, and the wizard artillery thing as I mentioned before, but those are all external justifications. If D&D is going to claim to have a setting, as some people claim it does, I need a reason why magic works in this particular manner. Contrast this with other games that have magic systems. I understand why spell drain is a thing in Shadowrun. Magic tires you out, it beats you over the head with that fact. I understand why chaos rolls are a thing in Warhammer Fantasy and 40k. All magic is chaos magic, and doing that is like handling unstable radioactive material. Sometimes more literally. I understand why there's a limited amount of casts you can do in Legend of the Five Rings. Magic is asking the local elemental kami for favors, and you can only ask so many before they're just not going to listen to you. But with this whole spells per day thing and memorizing and all that, in-universe, what's the reason for it? But in summary, the problems that I have with the Vancian model can come down to the following points. Per day limits in preparation discourage adventuring, making full rest more frequent in order to recharge spells and swap them out. This is where you get the math nerds about how many spells you should be reasonably using in an encounter or how many encounters per session, that kind of thing. Which really should be something that's determined by the table, not by a math equation, in my opinion. Power explosion at high spells becoming too useful. Spells stepping into the domain of other classes, such as knock. Spells stepping into the GM's narrative control, such as teleport or scry. And too much attention given to mages in RPG books compared to other classes or archetypes. With that said, a solution would do its best to avoid these issues. And there's two that I always think of. Spell points and endurance, which I kind of touched on with some of those other examples. With spell points, or magic points, whichever you want to call it, I think the reason this has been a far more enduring presence in video game RPGs and many tabletop ones is that it allows for better versatility while also keeping things simple. Granted, in most cases a spell is still using a set amount of points, but there's a degree of freedom present in that spell points frees up the preparation and level aspects of the Vancian model, as well as the fact that you're not stuck regarding what spells you can actually cast. You can improvise if need be. Of course, the less common approach is the endurance thing, which I am very fond of how it was done in like Slayer's D20, where casting spells inflicts non-lethal damage on the caster, ostensibly as fatigue. This can work for things like Gonzo Fantasy and Dark Fantasy, or cases where you just want the spellcaster to get tired from casting spells. Endurance can be a dramatic factor in those things. On the other hand, there's still the issue of determining cost, as well as how the fatigue damage plays out mechanically, if at all. There are a few others, but in each case a pool of points is used as a resource, and has to have spells cost be balanced across it. While the Vancian model doesn't have that problem as much, shifting it to the classes instead, it overall is a model that is more suited to single encounters than longer campaign sessions or beyond that. Also, the Vancian model, because of the limited thing, does provoke the too good to use problem, as H.C. Bailey points out. If there's a take-home message from this, it's that trying to adhere to traditions blindly does no one any favors. Regardless of the tradition, it can devolve into a circular form of logic. We do things a certain way because we've always done things a certain way, and that's why we do things this way. Stay frosty.
In nomine Christi, Amen.